Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
How's everyone doing lately?
We're doing well lately.
Thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
What a thoughtful,
I hate to bring this up right
guy.
now, but I'm still kind of mourning and grieving the departure of Rachel. And I almost say Rachel at the top of every episode still. It's really a hard habit to break. I just got so used to saying it.
I'm not used to going first either.
I look at Jess, I go, Jess. Jess, that's your name. So the other day, my wife was in my vehicle, and not that should be a weird thing, but it's just usually when the whole family's together, we're usually in her car. And she commented on how clean my car was.
Really?
And I felt kind of good about myself, Yeah, you know what? I try to keep things clean. I like organization. The older I get, the more I like thrive and everything having its place. And got me thinking, like, what's, how messy is everybody's car right now? Can we do a little check-in?
That's a good question. Mm-hmm. That's typically for us. Like, we can't fit my entire family in my vehicle. So my vehicle is typically mine or my wife's if she goes and works, but whoever's got the kids is in
that's the car,
in the van. And my car, typically my front seat, and right now I'm trying to picture it. Typically I have the rotation of masks for the week that start on Monday and then gradually go down and then get washed. So there's usually on Monday a bunch of masks sitting on my chair, as well as
stuff for noon ball.
That's in the back, usually for noon ball or the workout here at Tap Into Fitness.
Yeah.
They sponsor this. No, they don't.
No.
But yeah, it's pretty clean for me, because I'm not the side. The side things always have some straw wrappers or in the door. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any there because I have a little trash can in my car. It's a little collapsible.
That is my
one,
trash can.
And I just put all my trash in there, keep it organized. The thing right now is there were some, where I parked my car, there are some dead leaves that got left over from the fall that didn't really get cleaned up that well. And a lot of those have been, tracked into and broken and stomped into my carpet. And so that's the messiest it is right now, which is sad.
I feel like you guys are lightweights compared to, I have 3 car seats. I'm normally the one that's driving all the kids. And I will blame some of it on them, but it's just like, I feel I'm always ready for whatever's going to happen. So it's like, I've got gym clothes in my front seat, and I have this bad habit. I'm admitting it, but I will, like, if I have like a piece of trash, I will just throw it.
Sniff it. No.
That's
your socks.
That's you, Alex.
Sorry.
I'll like toss it on the front passenger seat, and then I'll pick it up like halfway through the week. But it's like, for Mother's Day, I was like, Ben, please just vacuum and clean out my car. Just pull that stuff out. And the things that we found, I mean, there was like 2 winter blankets.
If you had to guess, are your kids goldfish people?
They're actually not too bad about eating in the car.
No, we don't really petrified McDonald's or anything.
But it was like Avala's little bucket to feed the goats back from October, and there was like winter blankets and books and toys that they had. Like they have to bring a toy into the car every time. So I pretty much could have gone on vacation for a week and had no problem. But thanks, Ben. It got all cleaned out on Mother's Day, so hopefully it'll last for a while.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I would say, hey, this is the time. Yeah. Like, if you want to ride in my car, this is it. Yeah. This is the week.
My van is a different story. And typically once a week, Caleb, who was a resident, he's graduating. He graduated last week. He would ride with me to noon ball. I'm going to miss him once a week. And that would be the day that he would get in the car, and I'd have to clean off the entire front seat and then throw it in the back. And then my kids would get in the back seat into their seats, and I'd have to pick them up from school, throw it back in the front. So it's like swapping. Yeah, so that's why I try to keep it more clean these days, because I got tired of that.
Well, I mean, really, we're just the examples to people. We're just setting an example.
The winter, I think it's
I feel like I'm making people feel better. Like you
Yeah.
can relate.
I think the winter is just easier to pile stuff up in my
Yeah.
car because I pull right into the garage. I don't want to have to like open the other, door, and just cleaning out is more of a hassle when it's like snowing and really cold. But then in the summer, I feel like my car is generally more clean.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever use those? It's a little can and you close your car doors.
Axe body
you
spray?
like set off the little car bomb in your
No,
car.
I have not.
And then you leave your car running for 10 minutes and it circulates and it pulls out the odor and
I
puts
do that
a
with
new
like
car smell.
bug bombs in my
Yeah.
basement.
Yeah, you can. There's for your car. It's amazing.
Like you have lice in your car? Or
No,
something?
it's
Oh.
like it pulls out like any odors,
Oh.
and then it puts this beautiful new car smell
Wow.
into your
I
car.
only have one boy, so I don't quite need one of those.
jeez, yeah.
Three
just
boys.
can't-
That's a whole other.
I can't believe how many cars I've seen though over the years that have just like trash in them up to the window. Like I've taken pictures of them just because I'm always fascinated by it. And I get that like when you have kids, it can be messy and it can get messy quick, but I don't know if there's people living out of the car. Maybe that's
Maybe.
part of it. That's like a legit thing I know, but it just so much trash though. It just stacks up.
I feel like you can learn a lot about somebody by looking what's in their car. So I'll pull up next to different staff members and I'm like, oh, that's Paul Geddon's car. What's in that front seat? I peek.
Yeah.
I take a little gander.
I saw a staff member one time with a corn dog sitting in their dash, like baking in the sun. I don't know if that was like, all right, they woke up in the morning, it was frozen, and it was going to bake in there during lunch, and they were going to come out at lunch and just.
Oh, you shouldn't be putting Mark Ashton on
Leftovers.
blast like that.
I said a staff member on purpose. Man, apparently I've told that story.
Not confirm or deny that.
It was?
I can't talk about it.
Oh, boy.
Because we have a podcast.
Yes, we do. Let's
we
get
got a
to
podcast.
it.
That's right. We are starting. We don't normally do series around here, but we are doing a 3-week series on sexuality starting today. So everybody buckle up and get ready for that. I'm pretty excited for this
Me too.
series.
Yeah, we've got Connor that's going to come on for our first one, who is a guy that we know. We've had conversation with, goes to Christ Community Church, is gay. And so we're going to have a conversation with him. But overall, through all these conversations, I think one of the things we want to make sure we say up front is that our hope and our goal is to position ourselves, so us that are on the podcast and our listeners, just to be in proximity to people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So we're just going to be asking them questions, hearing real stories about their lives, having honest conversations. But our goal here is not to debate theology with each guest around, biblical scripture, things like that. We want them to feel comfortable enough to share, where they're at. And we do think, having conversations around this topic is important and they must be had. But we've found just in our circle and our professional circle and counseling, pastoring people, that just works best in safe places where both people can be honest about scripture and their interpretation of scripture, their own sin. And that just takes trust. And we know that God does incredible things. I've seen God do incredible things in there. But when you're under bright lights and all of this, we just don't want this podcast to become a soundbite where people are just taking this and lobbing it at people that are a part of that community and saying, I told you so. So again, our hope in these conversations is just to build a place that's a bridge, a place where there's proximity that can help eliminate some of our prejudice. And so I think that's important to know that that's our goal in this as we go into it. And that might make some people upset for a variety of reasons. But man, we just want to hear stories and hopefully help us all learn in that.
All right. Connor is coming up next. Connor, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time to sit down and have this conversation. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Doing good. That's good. I think the best thing to do is just let people get to know you, a little bit about your background, what you do, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I won't bury the lead or anything. I would identify as a gay Christian. I'm an attorney here in Omaha and didn't grow up in the church per se. I mean, growing up, my mom was kind of the first person in my family to really come to faith. And then I would say she kind of slowly evangelized the rest of my family. I was one of the last and kind of the most resistant to that. And for a long time, I would say that my sexuality was a major kind of roadblock into just coming to faith. Despite my mom's best efforts. But yeah, so I've kind of been, I'm a relatively new Christian. I was baptized in 2017 and I'm about 30. So, I mean, in the span of things, a fairly short amount of time. Where to go from there? So, I guess I would say that, I've kind of gone through, a journey as far as, trying to figure out, hey, is this a lifestyle that I want to live? Do I want to live like an openly gay lifestyle? Do I want to just try to sort of white knuckle it and do the whole singleness celibacy thing on my own? Do I want to try a heterosexual relationship with a woman? I've tried that as well. So, I've tried all the things and, right now I'm just kind of taking it day by day and trying to live in God's grace.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing besides that. Maybe some of your other things that happened kind of led you to this place. I know you mentioned your mom. Are there other things that were involved in this journey?
Yeah. So, some people talk about knowing that they were gay from, as old as they, or, even being really little. I would say that I didn't really figure it out until I was in, my teenage years. And obviously any guy who's ever, been around other teenage guys, like, knows how hard that is. And I know that we're in a bit more of a progressive place today than we were even 10 years ago. But, even still, gay and words like that, are used in, like, obviously a very derogatory fashion. So, like, having those feelings as a teenage kid, I think for most guys, it's kind of horrifying. Guys and probably likely girls who, have feelings for women. So, initially that was something that I just, like, tried to resist with all I could. And, I was very, I guess what you would call straight acting. I didn't really speak with a lisp or do anything that I thought would identify me as gay. And I guess maybe one of, like, the only initial indicators is that for a long time I've had a major issue with body image. So at one point I actually had an eating disorder. And while I was going through like therapy for that, I actually had a counselor ask me if I was gay, and I could not figure out what it was they heard about me or saw that pulled that out. But, I think in kind of like an act of, no, I'm not going to accept this. This is not who I am. I threw a fit and I told my parents about it, and I was like, I'm never going back there, just super dramatic. And, and to this day, one of the things that I, like, regret a ton is my mom actually came to me at one point when, I don't know, maybe like 15, 16 or something, and she asked me if I was gay, and I just lost it on her. And like I said, to this day, I really wish I could take that back. I remember saying, I'm never going to forgive you for asking me that, and then, 2 years later, I'm coming out to her. So.
Yeah. So what was that process like from going and having that conversation, really trying to convince people that you weren't, whether it was in school or even your mom, or to even do that to, a counselor or therapist, and really what made you want to reject that identity based on, like, culture, school? I could see some of that pressure, like in the locker room talk and, the boys will be boys kind of stuff where, words like gay or homo or fag are just thrown around ad nauseum. But what made you, like, how'd you start to go from, I really, really don't want to be identified as this, especially if you said you weren't a Christian at that time? Like, what were the cultural indicators, and then what led you to have that conversation?
So I'm sure this will shock you, but it had to do with going to college. I did my freshman year of school up at the University of Minnesota, and going from sort of, a slightly more conservative suburb, very tight-knit community, to a much more, urban, liberal, progressive, very open and accepting, like this, when you go from a culture where I think same-sex attraction is very much shunned to an area where it's a lot more accepted, I think, when you experience those feelings, you're a lot more inclined to, try to indulge them or explore them, whatever. And, when it's acceptable, you're like, yeah, I mean, there's other people doing it and it's okay. And they seem normal. So I'm going to kind of plug into that. So, eventually, met a guy my freshman year up there, and, came out to my mom. I think it was Easter Sunday when I was 18. Yeah.
It's good timing.
I know. But yeah, so, when that first happened, I got to give my parents and my family as a whole a lot of credit, because even though they may not have been, they were really never affirming of that lifestyle, I would say, but there was never any, I was not disowned, or, there was never any feelings of, like I wasn't going to be accepted in their eyes. It was always, hey, we love you. We don't necessarily condone that behavior, but, you're still our son. And my family's been great about it. And I think that has become even more pronounced over the years, as they've seen me try to struggle with resisting that lifestyle versus, just what that looks like. So I'm really fortunate in that I've had a family that has always been there backing me, when I know that is not the same situation for a lot of other, LGBT people.
So as you do, you start to make the transition, your mom gets evangelized too, and she starts to accept this, and your other people in your family, you said you were the last one that kind of came along to this, and you're starting to hear probably about Christian culture and their perspective, especially on, homosexuality and some of the sexual sins, and how just in Christian culture it seems to be like labeled as the worst of the worst things. Like how do you start to like rectify those kind of things? Is that what made you, want to come along later to trust in Jesus? And then as you start reading scripture, how do you start to wrestle with, can I be gay and a Christian? What's that process look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I would say that I had really just sort of always assumed that from a Christian perspective, like there was, I assumed that gay people were kind of condemned. Growing up, I did come to church on occasion. There was a while where my family was, regularly going every Sunday. I kind of paid it lip service, didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. And I would say that what I considered kind of the subliminal message directed at gay people was that, they weren't accepted, and that did nothing but kind of push me further away from the church. And honestly, I would say that was my sexuality is probably not even the first or second biggest thing that pushed me away from the church. I would say that something like, pride and my desire to want to control things is probably a much more prominent area of sin in my life than my sexuality is. What ultimately brought me to faith is having tried to sort of live a lifestyle of, I'm going to be gay, I'm going to be okay with it. When I got to a point where I felt like everyone in the circle of people that I cared about, whether it was my friends, family, coworkers, everyone that meant anything to me in my life was saying, hey, it's okay. If you want to be gay, we're going to love you no matter what. And I pressed into that, and I tried to find relationships, even like monogamous, loving, not lust-filled relationships. I mean, it still resulted in like feelings of emptiness, And it was kind of when, like you get to that point of finding the thing that you think is going to fulfill you, and when it still leaves you feeling really empty, I think that's when I started just looking for other things, because I mean, after, graduating college, school and everything, go out getting a job, having some real money for the first time, I tried, well, I'm gonna fill all my wants with stuff, or I'm gonna fill it with people or relationship, everything but God. And when you go and you try that route and you find out how empty it is, it makes you look for other things. And my parents had always, kindly and patiently, I would say, invited me to church, and I rarely took them up on it, but when I did go, eventually the messages kind of started to soak in, and it started to mean something. And
it sounds like your relationship also kind of started to develop with the Lord.
Yes. Yes. I would say
personal.
Very much so. Yep.
What about like in that time, what sort of resources or things did you go to try to justify either way, whether it be for a homosexual lifestyle or not? Like, did you find anything that helped or didn't help?
Yeah, so I would say that, initially after coming to faith, that was not even, my main concern. I think the thing that I poured into the most right away was just trying to develop a relationship with Jesus. But, eventually that sort of new car smell of Christianity starts to wear off, and you kind of, it's like you hit real life, and it's like, that's great. I have a relationship with Jesus and I believe that, but I'm still lonely here in the now, So yeah, I absolutely wanted to figure out, is there a way that I can make this work? Can I find a monogamous homosexual relationship and still have it fit within a Christian framework? So I went out and I read all the books I could find on the subject. The majority of the stuff that you're going to find is going to be non-affirming, meaning, they don't necessarily support homosexual relationships. But you can absolutely find stuff that does support the view that, two people of the same sex can live a biblically based relationship. And I just kind of came to the point where I just felt like I had to do so many like mental contortions to actually subscribe to the view that it was okay, and I absolutely want that to be true. I would love to be able to say, yep, God says it's okay. But I mean, at the end of the day, I do think one of the things that most convinced me of the existence of a God is just the feeling that I got, when, again, like I said, I'd be in a relationship with someone and everything should be okay. And there's no reason why I should not feel okay with it. And, I'm not trying to say that I heard like an audible voice or something, but, I just get this feeling or this presence of like, this is just not right. This is wrong. This isn't what is in store for you.
So were there things you did, in saying, hey, how did God wire me this way? If God is good and this isn't his plan, did you say, I know there's different groups, that are out there. I know one of the difficulties that I've had, or that I've talked to people that have had this conversation, is like, hey, there's people that are like, hey, I can pray the gay away, or I can just get in a heterosexual relationship, like you said earlier, maybe white knuckle that and everything will be fine. And then eventually that attraction, to men or to that same sex is going to go away. Has that, like, did you try to do that? Like, try to like, all right, I'm going to try to be with a woman. I'm going to try to, what are the things that you tried to solve, or maybe make yourself heterosexual or fit into the heteronormative, culture that's in the church?
Mm-hmm. So back when I first came out to my parents, they actually asked me if I would consider going to a ministry that's no longer in existence, but it was basically that. It was a Pray the Gay Away sort of ministry, and it was run by a bunch of people who had claimed that, they had absolutely changed their sexual orientation, and, and again, I don't want to say that can't happen, because there are people that claim that it's happened, and I have no reason to call into question what they say has actually happened to them. I have not experienced that. I've prayed for that for years, and at this point in time, I just don't think it's in the cards for me. I know God can do all things. I'm not going to say that it would never happen, but at the same time, like, that is not what I'm banking on in the moment. So, I think, if you're looking for that sort of thing, like, you can absolutely find it. But I think that the vast majority of information and evidence on that subject as of today would show that is not, not only is it incredibly unlikely to actually happen, but I think that it can actually be really damaging, even, from a theological or even a psychological standpoint, because a lot of what I've found is that a lot of the sort of the underlying concept behind a lot of that sort of approach is that if you're not getting your sexuality changed, you're doing something wrong. You're either not praying hard enough or you're not believing hard enough, and that calls into constant feelings of what am I doing wrong? Am I not living? It's almost like a distorted prosperity gospel type thing, and yeah, that view, tried it, doesn't hold any appeal for me.
Yeah.
So growing up in the church, or spending some of your teenage years and your adult life in the church, and being where you're at, how do you feel like the church has negatively impacted you in your journey?
So I think, like, approaching anyone who needs, like, forgiveness, which is everyone, you have like this balance of providing grace and truth. And I think for the longest time, the church's approach was way too heavy on the truth and, like, not heavy enough on the grace. So, it was more like, homosexual, you're a sinner and this is wrong. And, and homosexual behavior may be sinful, but I don't think anyone wants to hear truth that you're trying to speak unless they know that you're coming to them with grace first, And so, at least initially, I didn't really experience a whole lot of that in the church, but I would say that conversations that I've had from people who have been, harmed by the church would be related to the idea that they weren't welcome there because of their sexuality, or, God didn't love them because they were gay, or, something like that. And obviously that doesn't really have any sound biblical footing, so I think, today, for the most part, I think we're kind of experiencing the opposite problem, where you see a lot of churches sort of flipping on that, and it's like way too heavy on the grace, but there's not a whole lot of truth in it, They're just, so afraid to actually speak to what is probably sound theology that, they just, in the last, 5-10 years or whatever, we've obviously seen, like, a huge proliferation of it in our culture, where it's just, it is so mainstream now, whether it's through Supreme Court cases or, just, the acceptance that you see just walking down the street. It is absolutely in your face everywhere you go. So to try to adhere to a, traditional Christian sexual ethic, it is difficult. And I think for churches that want to maintain that approach, it's going to be hard going forward. So I do think it's really a battle between, recognizing that in the past, this may not have been handled as well as it could, But at the same time, you don't want to just so far overcorrect that you lose your scriptural basis, you know?
Yeah, that's good.
I think a lot of times too within the church, especially people who've maybe been church their whole lives, there's just so many misconceptions. What are some of those that maybe you can even just enlighten us on that you've experienced, whether it's people just stereotyping what a person who is homosexual is, or what their lifestyle is, or why there may be a threat to them, or different things like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you know, there's a lot of stereotypes that, you know, if you're a gay guy, you're effeminate, or if you're a lesbian, you're butch. And I can say from experience that I find that that's more false than it is true. You know, yeah, obviously there's going to be people that play into stereotypes. Those stereotypes came into existence for a reason. But at the same time, to assume that, I mean, that, you know, every gay guy wants to act like a woman, I don't think is accurate. I certainly don't want that, you know, and I think obviously the same thing's true, you know, for a lot of women. So I think just starting by not stereotyping and recognizing that, you know, a person's sexuality is like one very small facet of who they are. I mean, if I was going to talk about what I identify as, you know, just as a person, I think sexuality would be, I mean, being gay would be a ways down on the list. I mean, obviously, I called myself a gay Christian earlier, but because I mean that's what we're talking about right now. You know, I don't first think of myself as, hey, I'm gay. You know, that's not the first identity marker that pops into my head. So I think that
You're a lot more complex.
I would like to think
I think
so.
we all are, but we're all more complex than just our sexuality is part of it.
Right.
But you're saying there's more. There's more
Absolutely.
to you. You want to be known for more than that too.
Absolutely. So, you know, I would say if you're, you know, trying to talk to a person who struggles with same-sex attraction, I would say that don't assume that you know really anything about them aside from the fact that they struggle with same-sex attraction. You know, that again, that's just the sexuality piece. So
That's good.
Yeah. So when you have some of that conversation and you're, you know, talking about, I guess, some of those stereotypes or whatnot that people have inside of homosexual relationships or even the LGBTQ community, how do you like deal even with that? You know, so I think there's part of you know, Pride, you know, month in June, and there, like you said, there have been a lot more openness to this culturally. I was at a gas station, you know, the other day, and all the Skittles were white, and it was like the only thing that deserves a rainbow in June in Pride month are the Skittles, and I think to some degree elevating some of this conversation for the sake of humanity and for people and their rights. I think a lot of times Christians want to marry like rights of humans, you know, to be able to have access to health care or to be able to do, you know, those types of things. Even, you know, if two people are in a homosexual marriage, that they, you know, if because they're not a heterosexual marriage, the spouse shouldn't be able to be on insurance. And there becomes a lot of complications that get into ethics and outside of, we don't live in a Christian culture. You know, this isn't, our culture's not, we don't have to abide by the Bible, you know, just because it was written with, you know, a lot of foundational parts of Christianity, our Constitution, doesn't mean that people don't just have access to some of these types of things. And so as you wrestle with like those types of kind of conversations, even with maybe friends or other people inside of the LGBTQ community, how do those kind of arguments in getting into pride and all those kind of things, is it a good thing that we're becoming more open, that people are becoming more aware that there is more of this culturally for an understanding of people, I guess?
yeah, so I definitely think that it's kind of a double-edged sword type thing, because obviously, I mean, you know, you go back to the 1970s and homosexuality was considered a mental disorder.
Yeah.
You know, and I would say, bigotry and, I mean, hatred that existed on some levels toward homosexuals. I mean, I don't think you can ever justify that, you know? So I think that we've moved away from a place where that sort of thing is commonplace. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that's progress. You know, I think that, you know, and as Christians, I think we should absolutely support that. You know, when Jesus is calling us to love everybody, you know, I don't think that homosexuals should ever be in a position where they feel like they need to, you know, whatever, stay in the closet and you know, hide what their feelings are, because I do think that, you know, repressing things like that is not healthy. That having been said, indulging all those feelings and making it so acceptable, you know, that, I mean, again, not trying to get political, but, you know, I think we've overcorrected. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I think especially with coming out and hearing about coming out stories, that's like one of the most vulnerable things that you or someone else could do. And when I talk about the church, I'm talking about like not necessarily Christ community, but like us as the body.
Yep.
What can we do to help like with those types of things, and like even remediate like how we act, how we are viewing people? Because for me, I feel like I've moved into a position where I was raised much more conservative in a legalistic background, and I've moved more to a posture of learning and listening. And so I'm glad that you're here and we're having this conversation. And so for someone that might be like me, or maybe even farther behind in that journey, like what can the church do at this point to, with all the different things that are, there's this push for acceptance, and it's kind of confusing. And so what can we do? Help.
That is a great question. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it, again, like I said earlier, it's going to be tough for churches that want to hold to a traditional view of Scripture that homosexual behavior is not acceptable within, you know, from God's perspective. Now, again, that having been said, I do think that there's a lot of things that the church can do to just really help people who are struggling with that issue. So, and I think a lot of it is the messaging. You know, don't focus so much on what it is you're giving up, you know, your sexual behavior. Look towards, you know, what it is that you have. You know, I really believe that God doesn't say no to something unless he's actually saying yes to something better, you know? Mm-hmm. So I don't think he's just arbitrarily saying no to acting out on feelings of homosexuality. I think what he's saying is, you know, your ultimate reward is not in this life. And I can't guarantee that you're not going to have struggles in this life, you know? So I think part of that's the messaging. Don't just tell homosexual people what they can't do, you know, like focus on what the benefits are from not, you know, playing into those behaviors are. I think another thing too is as someone who is currently single, and, you know, again, I want to, you know, like really fit in well and nicely to the church. And at times, you know, it really does feel like church can be very geared towards, you know, family units primarily. And, you know, again, not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but I do think that it can create a void, or at least a feeling of a void for people that are single. And that's not even, you know, people struggling with sexuality. That's just singles in general. So I do think there are things that the church can do to, you know, sort of better orient themselves to singles, you know, and look at that as a more acceptable approach to pursuing Jesus. You know, Jesus was single, Paul was single. You know, I do think that there's viable and fruitful ways to be a single person. You know, but that involves finding community in other ways. You know, I think we're very much like communal beings, and I think we need relationship with people. So, I mean, you need to have those a strong Christian community. You need hopefully you can have a close family unit, things like that, just to maybe replace what a romantic relationship is not providing.
Well, I think one of the issues too with the church is just when we do only minister or speak as if like heteronormative relationships, and then like that object one is to meet Jesus, find Jesus. Object two is to get married, because that's gonna like make you, get on the JV team, and then you become on the varsity team once you start having kids. And for all sorts of reasons, this really becomes bad theology, but our programming and everything that we wrap around it is, we talk about sex as if it is the ultimate thing, and it is good. It's a gift from God. But then Paul also talks about singleness being a gift from God. And so I think one of those things is figuring out that God gives each of us unique gifts and unique pathways to know him. And one of the best ways for some people to know God and to be sanctified is through marriage and through having kids. But that's not the way, and I think a lot of times we present it as if that is the way. That is the way to the best pathway to sanctification. We tell stories about how our kids or our wives help us become more like Jesus, which I think is, yes, that's true. But it's not ultimate. It's not prescriptive. It's descriptive. And so it's how it's working in our lives and describing how God is at work in all of our lives. And he uses different things to get our attention. And someone who would choose, celibacy is more like Christ in that way than I am, And so, I think that's one of the places where the church has not done a lot of justice. And then it is lonely, for it's opportunity for loneliness for people that, like you, that have said, hey, I believe I've come to this conclusion about scripture in my life that I can't pursue this part of my sexuality in a relationship sexually. And then in the church, it's like, well, then you program everything towards people that aren't, that are married and have kids, and it's all about that. Then it's like, what do? We tell you, stay away from that. Stay away from living that way. But, we're too busy for you, running around with our families and our family programming and all that kind of stuff. And so what are some of the ways that you've found community, you've seen solution, I guess, to that problem that we do in the church?
Sure. So I would say that I have a really strong group of Christian friends, and that's been great. I mean, I have a journey group that I'm very plugged into. Just having spent, the last few years here really trying to, on some level, I think church is kind of like, it's like going to school where you're going to get out of it what you put into it. If you just, want to show up for an hour on Sunday, that's fine, but you may not get as much out of it as someone who is plugged in and is serving and is involved in groups and just doing what they can to really try to find connection there. And I've really tried to dive into that. So, again, the strong group of Christian friends, journey group. I actually also lead a renewal group that is geared towards Christians who struggle with same-sex attraction. So that has been another source of, not even just looking at Christian friends per se, but more specifically Christians who are dealing with this issue. I found that that's a huge resource in my life, knowing that they can, I have a lot of friends that are Christian, and I have a lot of friends that are gay. I don't have a lot of friends that are gay and Christian. So it's kind of a unique area to be able to find support in.
Why do you think that is so difficult to find so many people that are label themselves as both?
I think that a lot of it goes back to that stereotype that we talked about earlier, where, I know in the gay community, the view is rampant that the church is just anti-gay. Just, right, wrong, true, indifferent, that's the way that it's looked at. So I think that from most gay people, all you have to do is start talking about church, and the wall goes up, or they don't want to hear it anymore. And I know because I've been there, and I've been that person.
And I suppose that's partially due to just the message of hate that does get spread in the media or in other ways. That the church. Sometimes we get represented for the things we do, bad and good, and sometimes we get misrepresented for the things we do, bad and good. But when you see things like the Westboro Church and the way they would protest homosexuals, things like that, I'm assuming someone who doesn't have a direct connection to the church, that's the takeaway.
Yep. And that's really unfortunate, obviously, because I don't think it's fair to judge a religion based on how it is taken to extremes or manipulated, and so the Westboro Baptist Church, that is one church among thousands, I don't know, maybe millions, I don't know how many churches there are, but the point is, huge outlier. That does not represent the 99% of Christian churches that are loving, and whether they're affirming or not, that don't have that message of hate. So it is unfortunate that the extremes get all the media airtime.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about just I guess perception is part of it in some ways, but a lot of times you'll hear the argument, well, being gay is a choice. This is a choice you've made. You're not born that way, or et cetera, et cetera. Where can you help us maybe kind of navigate some of that to someone who's listening and going, well, this is really an easy solution. You just need to choose to not be gay. Like that's the solution here. Maybe we can kind of explain some of the different ways people look at that and in a helpful way.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm not a biologist. I don't have the most recent, study information in front of me. Anecdotally, I actually believe that it's kind of a combination of nature, nurture, whether some of it is you're born with this way, some of it might be your environment, for the longest time, the prevailing viewpoint about homosexuality, especially if you were a man, was that, you were too close to your mother and that you had a horrible relationship with your father. Mm-hmm. And that is not true of me at all. I have a great relationship with my dad. So, I was not abused as a child. Mm-hmm. I can't point to anything like that. At the same time, do I think it's 100% biological that I came out of the womb that way? I don't know. It's I think it's really hard to tell. But the bottom line is, I don't think that it's just a choice. So to say that, hey, I was somehow subliminally conditioned this way, and it's just a switch that I can flip and I can change my mind. We already talked about the pray the gay away approach and how I don't think that's a workable solution for the vast majority of people. Really, I think probably the way that makes the most sense to sort of distinguish this is the orientation versus the behavior. Mm. And I know that's something that CCC has sort of drawn out in their approach to homosexuality, and that's that it's not the desire in and of itself that's sinful, it's acting on it. And, I can't necessarily control the feelings that I have and the attractions that I experience. But what I obviously can do is control whether I act on them or whether I think about them more. I think that that's probably the most meaningful way to say it, is that the church is not, or, the view, I think, of most non-affirming churches is not necessarily that homosexual desires are wrong. It's acting on them that are wrong. And that could be to people that take issue with that. I would say that it's just as true of any vice that someone might experience. If you're an alcoholic and you have, a desire to go out and get plastered every night, having that desire is not sinful in and of itself. But if you're actually doing it every night, it's different. We make we separate all the time behavior from desire or thought in our, not even just in religion, but in our world, So I think that that's a very meaningful distinction to make, especially for this subject.
Yeah, I think there becomes a few different arguments that people make on, a few sides to those arguments. And I think when we were talking about this a little bit, you gave us some thoughts about this. And so one of them is that just God makes people gay. God made you gay. He wants you to live out the way he created you. Why would he give you those desires if he didn't want you to live that out? And therefore, to live your truth is to fully embrace, what that is. And he blesses, homosexual relationships just as much as he blesses heterosexual relationships, and that, so you can do that. And that's one way that people are like, yes, God made me this way, and how I live faithfully is to embrace that. I think that's, side A. I think the next is same-sex attraction wasn't created. It wasn't good. It wasn't called good. If you go back to Genesis, the beginning and how God created things in the garden, then I think another set of Christians, and I think Christians can fall in all of these categories, was, hey, all of this is a mess. This all happened at the fall. That's why I'm tempted even, to have lust that's not towards my wife, as a Christian. But we don't choose, who we're attracted to. That's okay. But you can't you can't change it. But there's absolutely in the biblical narrative no place that we would see God blessing, same-sex attraction. Some people would argue even, we see a lot of the biblical heroes with multiple wives and, all that kind of stuff, which God doesn't, bless, and so on and so forth. So then in that argument, side B, it's all a result of the fall. Everything was good. Sin pervaded the world. And then all of these temptations, whether it's to alcohol, whether it's to anything outside of what God explained in being good and blesses, is out of bounds, and we should live in bounds. And then the other, I think, side is same-sex attracted people. You just have to reject it. You have to keep praying until one day all of it goes away, and then that's part of your holiness. And you'll know maybe you finally arrived when you no longer have those attractions. I even hear people say that in the heterosexual, realm, like, I'm going to pray and only my wife is going to be the most smoking hot woman. I'm never going to be attracted to another woman and all that. Like, I've heard people say that inside of even heterosexual, circles. And I haven't found that to become the reality in my life yet. And so what in those arguments is appealing to you? Where do you feel like you land in those?
If you're looking specifically at the first one you mentioned, the God made me this way, that one doesn't hold a whole lot of merit in my eyes, because, you could apply that argument to any sinful thought that you experience. If I have a sinful thought, well, God made me that way, it must be okay. So I don't really give a whole lot of credence to that. There are, I think, other aspects of, affirming theology, like you just talked about, that I think that hold a little bit more evidential value. And yeah, speaking from someone who has like a clear bias that way, I want that to be true. So it would be hard for me to say that when I've been looking at these different approaches that I hadn't even, gone at it thinking, man, I really need to give this approach all the benefits of the doubt, because I want it to be true. I want to be able to live that way. But it's been my experience, just sheerly looking at the weight of evidence that's I don't think there's much support for that in Scripture. Now, when you go to the second one that you talked about, the side B is what they call it.
From like the fall, yeah.
Yeah.
Like sin entered, yeah.
That's kind of where I am now. I do think that I experience sin just like anyone else experiences sin. This is just, the thorn in my side or the cross I have to bear, whatever you want to call it. And I don't want to make it sound like it's, better or worse than any other sin that anyone else deals with, because I recognize that we all have something like that, and I don't want to try to quantify it and say that mine is worse than that in any regard. I don't think that's true. So, and then the third view that you talked about, where you just need to, sort of work at it until it's gone. I mean, we already talked about that a little bit. I don't think there's a lot of truth to that.
Cool. I think that's helpful just to know where you stand and how you've gotten there, and how do you interact with somebody that lands inside A. Like if you're having a conversation with someone who does say, I follow Jesus, and do you just say, we agree to disagree? Because I don't think it's a salvation issue, I guess is what I'm saying. And because I would be, man, if sin being not a part of my life, never giving into temptations was a requirement for salvation, I was out a long time ago. Right. But making those decisions and knowing where, some of these, some of my temptations lie in my own life. And I'm so grateful that God doesn't reveal all of my sin nature at once, because I think that burden would overwhelm me, but God works on those a little bit at a time, but doesn't mean I have less. Yeah. I'm not sinless, but I sin less in my life. And I think that's part of the process of sanctification. But for you, as you're having that conversation with somebody, because there's, I think, affirming gay Christians that would even disagree with you, like how do you approach that conversation?
Sure. So, I mean, it's helpful knowing that, I've given that approach very serious consideration, and there's times that, in the past that I would have considered myself in that camp. So it's not like I think that people who hold that view are just completely crazy. The first thing that I try to do, just like I try to do with anybody, is just really approach the situation with like love and acceptance more than anything else. I try to focus on what it is that we have in common as opposed to what divides us, because, if we're both gay and both Christians, that's a lot in common right there. So to focus on our exact interpretation of the scripture and whatever, immediately try to exclude someone on that basis, I don't think that that's a good way to go about it. So, take for example, what the group that we're trying to, grow here at the church for Christians that struggle with their sexuality. I don't care what side you'd adhere to or what view you adhere to. I think the message that I would want to put out there is that, you come there, you're going to experience love and acceptance more than anything, and just, being able to relate to other Christians that deal with that issue. Again, in the same way that, you can be good friends that have different political views or religious views, whatever, I don't want that single factor to divide us from having a more meaningful conversation on the subject or just being friends in general.
That's good. That's helpful.
I feel like what you're saying, I'm like, I should be doing the same thing to people. It's not just you interacting with people that are also gay. It's like that to me, like you're saying that, and I'm like, hey, that's a good thing for me to apply in the church, and for other people to be looking that way. Do you agree?
I think so, and to the extent that you can,
right?
Because,
but I'm saying just like the being loving and listening, and to that degree.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's a good approach. And I know that it's easy to sit here and talk about it, in a room on a podcast. It's a lot different, when I'm in traffic and someone cuts me off or, something like that. So, things can get heated in the moment, and I get that. But I do think that, as often as you can, you should just try to approach people with love in general.
Yeah. I think another thing we have to understand, knowing, hey, our culture's embracing this more, and it's more and more okay. It's legal, like you said. Literally, a couple decades ago, you could have been thrown into a sane asylum for having these kinds of thoughts, and it's happened to people, and And so in a world that is more and more affirming, in a culture that's more and more affirming, I think no matter where you are, if you're the most conservative Christian, and you totally think that this is, God didn't even give it, that homosexuals are choosing that lifestyle, even if you land there, I think we have to be able to approach people, meet them where they're at in their life. And that takes listening and understanding. For example, I've got neighbors that are two women that are married, and they both were artificially inseminated around the same time as my wife, and they're living, together. And so even if I believe, as a Christian, and I can support it biblically and all those things, that these people, these women are living an anti-biblical lifestyle, right? Now all of a sudden they've got kids, and this is legal, this is okay. So what's the process? How do I approach these people? Do I just go and say, hey, you're living a bad lifestyle, you guys move out tomorrow, you need to just separate the kids, share them part-time. The kids had nothing to do with this. They were just brought into the world. So I think we have to approach these things on individual bases, knowing that people are individuals, not just the swathing, hey, you're wrong and go fix it, because that's not always the answer. Even if you believe that about somebody, you've got to listen and think of what are the wisdom steps. You got to pray about it, and what's the best thing for that family? What's the best thing for those kids? What's the best thing for all of those scenarios? And I think that's where I fail to see a lot of Christians have empathy, and think about all of the repercussions of, and all of the wake, if you think, all the wake of sin in all of our lives. And so we have to approach people, I think, individually in these kinds of conversations, no matter where you land on the spectrum, because that's where I think a lot of pain and damage and bridges are burned. So
there's so many different things that manifest in a person's life that I think if you take a superstitious approach to it, whether it be a debilitating disease or other types of things where these things are biological, and people could look at that, and I think we've even seen it in the past in the church where people have gone, okay, you're struggling with this because there must be sin in your life, and you need to get that straightened out. And I think that's an approach that has, because homosexuality can be a very public sin to people, at least the way they describe it. If there is a couple that come to church, people could point that out and see that in the world and go, oh, okay, that's bad, right? And I think there are other examples of that where they've seen people who suffer with different things and go, okay, well, you just gotta fix that. And a lot of times what that does then is it makes it so easy for all of us to kind of just not talk about all the stuff that we're dealing with, not talk about the thoughts that we have, not talking about the sin that we commit or are very close to committing sometimes. It's just, and that's one thing where I just hope that anyone listening to this, can just start to do that self-examination where it's just like, how do we didn't have you on just to be like, here's the poster child for being Christian and gay, but here is a story that hopefully you can relate to. Like, it's so easy to label people and separate them from their humanity. And I think that is one of the most hurtful and damaging things that we can do, is to no matter what it is, it doesn't have to be homosexuality, it could be anything, but to separate a person from their humanity makes them an easy target at that point. And it's a stepping stone for you to just boister your own self and how you're better than them, because then you can deflect from all the things going on in your own life. And so when I think hearing your story and just, I think for all of us, there's compassion, because it's like, man, you're making such a tough choice that by all means, you don't necessarily have to make that choice, right? You're convicted to, but you don't necessarily have to do it for anybody else, And so the choice of, you're going to experience loneliness and different things like that, where so many people, like we mentioned in the church with their family units, can kind of take that for granted. And I guess I want to know, what are some ways that people can encourage you, but not just like fall into the tropes of like, you got it, champ. Like, just like what are the ways that God's people can rally around you and defend you too, because there are going to be people that hear this or hear about your story who are going to be upset or offended or whatever that might be because of their own ignorance. But how can God's people rally around you and say, you know what, like, we're here for you. We're here to support you, to pray for you, to just be that, company sometimes that you need,
Yeah. So that's good. I mean, I think a lot of it can kind of go back to what I was talking about earlier, just being able to find that community in the church. And again, like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean like, an attaboy. It's like, finding that meaningful connection, whether it's, whatever, hanging out outside of church, or, I mean, just, I think for people that do choose to try to go the single celibacy route, I mean, I would say, I mean, it could even be as simple as, like, hey, maybe you're going to have like a dinner party with couples, like maybe invite the person who's not a couple, and I think there are a lot of people that already do that. And I mean, one thing that I feel really, really blessed about is going to the church that I do go to, because I think there's a lot of that there. I don't feel like I'm continually excluded based on my marital status, So I do think CCC in particular does a lot of those things well from the beginning, but again, a lot of it just goes back to friendship, I think, and, but I mean, obviously it's authentic friendship, I don't want someone to be friends with me just because they think, oh, hey, he's lonely and he's, really, really walking a hard road and I just need to go see how he's doing. Nobody wants to be a pity friend,
Yeah, that's good. Jess, I'm kind of going to lean on you for this one, but Connor mentioned.
Oh yeah, Lighthouse. Yeah, let's talk about Lighthouse.
Okay.
It's Tuesday nights, 6:00.
Yep.
Go for it.
Yeah, Tuesday nights at 6:00. We are a space for non-straight doubters, seekers, and followers to try to approach non-straight sexuality from a biblical perspective. And, to anyone who would be considering coming to a group like that, I would say that whether you adhere to an affirming view or a pray the gay away view or a view that's more similar to what I've been pursuing at this point, I would say just to come, because you're going to experience acceptance more than anything else. No one's going to chastise you or, criticize you because of your viewpoint. I think first and foremost, we all recognize that we're God's children and we have an issue in common, in that we wrestle with sexual desires that we don't want. And maybe some people do want them, but sexual desires that at the very least can be kind of a lightning rod within the church. And at times it can be difficult to find support for that. And that's just the space that this group is trying to occupy right now.
Awesome. As we wrap things up, are there any closing thoughts you have that you'd like to share, or anything on your heart that you're like, I'm not going to be happy with myself if I don't leave without saying this? Or do you feel like you got it all out there?
I feel okay about it. I'm sure as soon as I'll leave, I'll say, shoot, there's that one thing that I was supposed to say, but no, I don't have anything else.
Any commentary? I know you listen to the podcast. Okay, so you have you're like,
who's your favorite?
I wanted to attack.
Who's your favorite?
I want to attack, or there's something that's happened. I mean, just ending on a lighter note, something that I've always wondered, or that was stupid, or I want to tell you live on camera, that was a dumb opinion. Any of those that come to mind?
No, but I will say that having gone through this exercise of looking at an issue that is very personal to me, and knowing that my goal is just to kind of try to foster discussion about it and ultimately point people to Jesus, I think it gives me a whole lot more respect for you guys, because I will say that there are times I can tend to be very opinionated, and there are times that I'm listening to the podcast and I think, get off the fence, like pick a side, and like I was saying, this has made me feel more like, well, I just want to. I want to make people uncomfortable. I just want to get people thinking about this subject, and it doesn't always behoove your listeners to have an opinion thrown at them. So as much as I can be like an armchair quarterback about you guys, with regards to podcast, I will say that this has been a humbling experience for sure.
Yeah, you're the only one.
Yeah.
Okay, the only one. So you're alone in your company there.
Yeah, I love that feedback. We've talked about that before, and I mean, we're not going to waste a bunch of time on it, but I do think a lot of times the nuance and the actual interesting conversations happen in that middle of the road thing. And a lot of times we want opinions because it's the safe thing, or it's like the comfort food where it's like, well, yeah, we all agree and this feels good, but then it's like, wow, you're alienating all these groups of people without even thinking about it. And really, to me, that's the boring conversation, to just come on here and go, well, this is the opinion and let's move on. Like it's actually learning and hoping that we can gain some empathy.
It's kind of wading through.
Yeah. And not just because once you close that door, then what? It's over. Well, I just want to say from all of us, I know this was like something very vulnerable for you to do, and we really, really appreciate that. And I hope people listening really take it to heart. And it's powerful to hear your story, and really, really appreciate your time.
I appreciate you guys having me on, so thank you.
Awesome. If you have any questions or concerns and you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you, but until then, we'll talk to you later.